The papers were signed at dawn. Ink still wet. Names spelled wrong. Dates half remembered. Freedom was declared before the sun rose. But by nightfall, no one had left. Not a single footstep crossed the dirt road. Not one wagon rolled away. No families reunited. No crying children ran toward the woods. The plantation gates stayed shut. And inside those gates, hundreds of people vanished from the record forever. This is not a story about chains breaking. It is a story about doors that never opened. In the summer of 1867, in a low river valley somewhere between Georgia and South Carolina, federal clerks documented the largest mass issuance of freedom papers in the region. Names, ages, family lines, everything was recorded. The documents still exist. They are real. They are archived. But the people listed on them? They do not. No census ever counted them again. No church recorded their marriages. No graveyard carved their names. It is as if freedom itself erased them. Local newspapers mentioned the plantation one final time, then fell silent. Neighbors claimed they saw smoke for weeks afterward. Preachers refused to speak its name. Children were told never to walk that road, even decades later. And the land refused to grow anything ever again. This documentary is about what happens when freedom is declared, but not allowed. When institutions smile, sign papers, and then quietly decide who gets to exist afterward. What you are about to hear was pieced together from letters, church minutes, property disputes, and one surviving confession written by a woman who never escaped, but lived long enough to write the truth. She titled it simply, "They Let Us Be Free. They Just Wouldn't Let Us Leave." The plantation had no official name by the time freedom arrived. Locals called it the Hollow. It sat in a bowl of land where sound died quickly. Birds avoided it. Wind moved strangely there, as if remembering something unpleasant. For generations, the Hollow was not just a plantation, it was a system. Families were born there, married there, buried there. Children grew old without ever seeing a town. Even overseers stayed longer than usual, as if the land convinced them not to leave. The owner at the time of emancipation was a man named Elijah Crowell. He was rarely seen. He believed in order. He believed in God. He believed that freedom, if given too quickly, would rot people from the inside. When emancipation reached the Hollow, Crowell did not protest. He did not argue. He hosted the federal clerks himself. Witnesses said he smiled while the papers were signed. But what no one noticed, what no one thought to record, was that Crowell never dismantled the rules of the plantation. Work assignments continued. Church attendance remained mandatory. Children were still separated from parents for education. Night movement was forbidden. Punishments were no longer physical, but they became psychological. "You are free," overseers told them, "but you are not ready." And somehow, the people believed it. Freedom existed on paper, but fear lived in the walls. At the center of the Hollow stood a wooden church with no windows. It had been built that way on purpose. Inside, sermons lasted for hours. The doors were locked once everyone entered. Candles were placed behind the pulpit so the preacher's face remained in shadow. The message never changed. Freedom was dangerous. Freedom was loud. Freedom attracted punishment. God, they said, had granted a special kind of mercy to those who stayed hidden. Records show that after emancipation, church attendance increased, not because people wanted to go, but because leaving the Hollow required church approval. Confession became mandatory. People were asked to confess thoughts of leaving, dreams of family elsewhere, imagine lives beyond the fields. Those who confessed were not punished. They were separated, moved to other work crews, reassigned children, placed under guidance. Slowly, families stopped speaking about freedom at all. And then something worse happened. People began to disappear, but only after church. The first to vanish were the young men. Then the women who asked questions. Then the children who cried at night. Officially, no deaths were recorded. The church ledger simply marked them as transferred. Transferred where was never written. By 1870, the plantation population had dropped by nearly half, but work output remained the same, which meant someone was lying. Neighbors later claimed they heard singing at night. Low, slow, exhausted singing. Then silence. Then nothing. Freedom papers remained stored in the main house, untouched. A locked drawer. A reminder of something dangerous. Years later, when the land was finally abandoned, surveyors reported finding hundreds of shoes buried behind the church. Different sizes. Men, women, children. No bodies. Just shoes. and scratched into the church floor, hidden beneath the pulpit, was a single sentence carved again and again until the wood splintered. We were free. We just stayed too long. By 1872, the Hollow no longer spoke openly about adults leaving. The focus shifted to children. Church leaders began using a new word, reassignment. They said it gently, as if it meant opportunity. Children were removed from parents under the excuse of education, spiritual training, or moral protection. Mothers were told it was temporary. Fathers were told it was God's will. The reassigned children were housed in long, low buildings near the tree line. No windows, doors facing inward. The church called them dormitories. But no teacher was ever hired. No books were brought in. Instead, children learned rules. Never speak your birth name. Never ask where others went. Never say you want to leave. Some children were sent back after months. Quiet. Changed. They avoided their parents' eyes. They flinched at open land. Others never returned. Church records list them as placed. Placed where again? No answer. Parents who asked too many questions were told their children were chosen. Special. Protected. And then those parents disappeared too. In 1889, a letter was mailed from a nearby town to a woman named Ruth Bellamy. Ruth had been born at the Hollow and reassigned as a child. Somehow, no one knows how, she escaped. The letter was written by her sister. It arrived 30 years after emancipation. The paper was brittle. The handwriting shook. It said only this: "They tell us we are free every Sunday. They just don't let us remember how." Ruth tried to return to the Hollow. She never made it past the road. Locals blocked her path. Not violently. Calmly. As if protecting something fragile. One man told her, "If you go back, they'll put you where the others went." Ruth later wrote that the land itself felt wrong. Like it was holding its breath. She kept the letter hidden for decades. After her death, it was found sewn into the lining of her dress. No envelope. No return address. Just proof that someone inside was still trying to speak. By the early 1900s, the Hollow had rebranded itself. No longer a plantation. No longer a church. It was now an orphanage. No state inspection ever occurred. No official charter was filed. Yet children kept arriving, from nearby towns, poor families, unwed mothers. The church promised structure, discipline, safety. What it really offered was disappearance. Children aged quickly there. Photographs from the time show faces that look tired beyond their years. Some children appear twice in records, same name, same age, years apart. Others vanish from the books entirely. Former staff later described a strict routine: prayer, labor, silence. Night sermons held underground. Confessions that lasted until morning. They were told the children carried inherited weakness. That freedom without correction would ruin them. Correction meant obedience. Obedience meant staying. When the orphanage finally shut down in 1931, no one came to reclaim the children. Some were listed as transferred. Others as completed. Completed what was never defined. Surveyors hired to assess the land reported something strange. Digging was nearly impossible near the old church and dormitories. Shovels struck hollow spaces beneath the soil. Not graves. Rooms. Buried rooms. And yet, no bodies. Just clothing. Shoes. Hair ribbons. Bibles with names crossed out. The Hollow was abandoned soon after. No sale records exist. No demolition permits filed. The buildings were left to rot. But people who lived nearby said the land never went quiet. Lights were seen at night. Voices carried through fog. And sometimes, children were heard singing hymns no one remembered teaching them. The first buried room was opened by accident. A storm had split the ground behind the old church. A sinkhole formed where the soil was weakest, right where the pulpit once stood. When workers climbed down, they expected roots. Maybe old foundations. Instead, they found walls. Smooth. Wooden. Carefully built. The room was large enough to hold dozens of people. Benches lined the sides. Chains were bolted into the floor, not to restrain bodies, but to control movement, to limit space, to teach stillness. There were scratch marks on the walls. Not from panic, from repetition. One phrase carved again and again at child height. Stay quiet and you can stay. More rooms were found after that. Connected. Planned. Buried deep enough to hide sound. No bodies were ever recovered. Which raised a worse question. Where did everyone go? Church minutes recovered from the main house mentioned something called transfer sermons. These sermons were held at night. Attendance was mandatory for those marked as unready. Witnesses later described them as long, slow rituals disguised as prayer. People were told they were being prepared, not punished. Prepared for freedom beyond the hollow. They were told the outside world was violent, that people like them were hunted, that staying invisible was mercy. The sermons lasted hours. People entered in groups. They never exited together. The church ledger recorded each name carefully, then drew a line through it. Transferred. Not dead. Not gone. Just moved. Moved into silence. Her name was Margaret Ives. She was a midwife. A reader. One of the few adults allowed access to the church archives. Margaret never attended transfer sermons. She pretended illness. Claimed visions. Played the role they feared. And she watched. She saw people taken underground. She saw children returned emptied of memory. She saw freedom papers locked away like contraband. Margaret believed the hollow didn't kill people. It absorbed them. She wrote that the institution needed bodies, but more than that, it needed belief. Obedience fed it. Silence strengthened it. Before the hollow closed, Margaret wrote a confession and hid it inside a hymn book. She ended it with a warning. They do not bury the dead. They bury the living until they forget how to leave. Margaret disappeared shortly after. But the confession survived. The hardest truth came last. People ask why no one escaped. Why freedom papers weren't enough. Margaret answered that too. She wrote that fear was taught slowly, carefully, generationally. Children born after emancipation never learned what freedom looked like, only what it cost. Leaving meant losing family, losing identity, losing protection. Staying meant survival. And survival feels like safety when you're tired enough. The hollow didn't need chains anymore. It had memory, routine, God, and time. By the time the gates were finally abandoned, there was no one left who remembered how to walk through them. Freedom had come, but it came too late. In 1974, 3 men went looking for the hollow. They were not ghost hunters. They were not journalists. They were county officials reviewing forgotten land claims. The hollow appeared in old tax maps, but not in modern records. No owner, no transfer, no closure, just land that had slipped through time. When they reached the site, 2 things stood out immediately. The road vanished about a mile out, and the air felt watched. Trees leaned inward. Sound didn't travel far. Even their voices seemed swallowed. The buildings were still standing, decayed, but intact, as if rot itself had been instructed where to stop. They found him books stacked neatly inside the church, shoes buried behind it, and floorboards that echoed when stepped on. One man refused to enter the church at all. He later said, "It felt like going back into something that didn't end." One of the men carried a tape recorder, not to capture ghosts, but to log their inspection. The tape exists. At first, it's just footsteps, breathing, doors creaking, then voices. Not whispers, not screams. Teaching. A calm voice reciting rules. Sit still. Listen. Do not remember. The men are clearly confused. They respond. They argue. They search. But the voice continues uninterrupted, like a sermon already in progress. Later on the tape, one man begins repeating the phrases without realizing it. The tape ends abruptly. The men left the hollow before sunset. They never returned. The last living witness was found by accident in 1982. Her name was Clara May. She was over 90, nearly blind, barely spoke. A nurse noticed she hummed hymns no one recognized. Hymns with verses about staying, waiting, being chosen. When asked where she learned them, Clara said, "Below." Clara had been reassigned as a child. She lived in the dormitories, attended transfer sermons. But she was never transferred, because she learned something the others didn't. If you never fully believe, the hollow can't keep you. She pretended obedience. She forgot on purpose. She waited until the place abandoned itself. When Clara was shown a photograph of the hollow, she cried. Not from fear, from relief. It finally stopped feeding, she said. She died 3 days later. After the investigation, the county tried to sell the land. No one bought it. Developers reported headaches. Workers quit after 1 day. Equipment failed near the old church. One bulldozer sank into the ground where no pit existed. The hollow resists being disturbed. Not violently, patiently. Locals say if you stand there long enough, you feel the urge to sit down, to wait, to stay. And that's the danger. Because institutions like the hollow don't die when abandoned. They die when remembered correctly. The freedom papers were never destroyed. That was not a mistake. They were kept pristine. locked away, protected from fire, flood, and decay. While buildings rotted, while people vanished, while names disappeared from every other record, the papers stayed untouched. Margaret Ives believed this was intentional. The hollow needed proof. Not proof for the outside world, but proof for itself. The papers were shown during sermons, passed quietly among leaders, used as evidence that freedom had been granted. We did our part, they would say, and that lie was powerful, because if freedom existed on paper, then anyone who didn't leave had chosen to stay. The hollow erased responsibility by preserving evidence. It wasn't a prison, they claimed. It was a decision. And history believed them, because history often trusts documents more than people. One final entry exists in the church ledger, dated 1931. One name, no age, no reason, just a line through it. Transferred. Researchers believe this name belonged to the hollow itself, because institutions, when they sense collapse, do something desperate. They move. The hollow didn't disappear. It changed form. Its methods lived on in schools that punished silence, in churches that equated obedience with holiness, in systems that offered freedom while quietly making survival dependent on staying. The hollow became invisible, which is the safest place to hide. The true horror of the hollow is not what happened underground. It's what happened after. No arrests were made. No apologies issued. No memorial built. Because nothing illegal could be proven. People were not enslaved. They were guided. Children were not taken. They were placed. People did not die. They were transferred. Language protected the crime. And that language still exists. Every time freedom is delayed for your own good. Every time silence is rewarded. Every time survival is mistaken for choice. The hollow did not need monsters. It needed patience. Today, the land is still empty. No fence. No sign. No marker. Just trees growing where buildings once stood. But the records remain. Names that were once real. Lives that were once lived. Freedom that came, but was never allowed to move. This is why the story matters. Not because it is unique, but because it is familiar. The hollow was not an accident of history. It was a design. And it only worked because people were taught to wait quietly for freedom that had already arrived. If you ever feel that pull, to stay still, to obey, to survive instead of live, remember this. Freedom that cannot be used is not freedom. And sometimes, the most dangerous place to stay is the place that tells you it's protecting you.